I think the M1 Macs are a massive leap forward, not just for Apple, but for computing in general. But not everyone agrees, and I think I've worked out why. Welcome back to Mark Ellis Reviews, and thank you as always for subscribing. If you haven't, just click that button. I received a really interesting comment on one of my recent M1 Mac videos. Just look at the specs, for God's sake. Incredible how professionals buy the Mac Mini and expect them to be their main workstation. He went on to suggest that the M1 Macs are built for average users, they're not built for heavy video editing or heavy stuff, as he put it. I don't agree with this, but this did get me thinking. Why are so many people opposed to the M1 Apple Silicon? I think it comes down to a few possible reasons. The first one is that they are Intel loyalists. And before I get into that, let's make it very clear that there are definitely Apple loyalists out there. And they are the most passionate tech fan base I have ever encountered. I love this, and while I don't quite understand the real kind of die-hard loyal fans who will defend their favourite technology to the hilt, I do admire how passionate they are. It's clearly heartfelt. They have a real deep-seated love of this technology and of these brands. And I think a lot of the people who have immediately said that the M1 is garbage and not worth anyone's time, they may just be Intel loyalists, and that's absolutely fine. Now, you could argue that the amount of stuff they throw the M1's way could be as a result of Intel's missteps over the years. Intel hasn't had a great few years at all. We've had those recent Justin Long adverts. If you haven't seen them, just go and Google it. They are trying to poke fun at the M1, and I'm all for that. I love a bit of brand battling, and as long as there's humour in it and there's a purpose behind it and they have something bigger to say, I love it. But these adverts by Intel are pretty terrible. So whether or not these people who are really bashing the M1 are just a little bit mindful of the fact that Intel are struggling, I don't know. Regardless, I have no problem with that. If you are an Intel loyalist and you don't understand why people are waxing lyrical like I am about the M1, that's absolutely cool. Another possibility is that they just haven't used an M1 Mac. And I defy anyone to sit down in front of one of these M1 Macs and not be impressed by how performant they are. For example, I was playing around with Logic Pro on my M1 Mac Mini last weekend, and Logic Pro is a music production suite, piece of software, whatever you want to call it. I've used it for many years. I've used it on pretty expensive, powerful Macs in the past. Now, using it on the M1 Mac Mini is just mind-blowing how well it performs. And the M1 Mac Mini that I have was just over £1,000, not very expensive at all for a Mac, and it absolutely has no problem running Logic at all. And I was running lots of plugins, lots of tracks, lots of fairly complicated synths, and it just doesn't sweat. It doesn't make any noise, the fan never comes on. If you can believe iStat menus, the CPU cores aren't really being touched at all. It's just hard not to be impressed by the M1. I just wonder if some of the detractors of this chip just haven't tried it. And I think it's really important to broaden your horizons with tech. It's why recently I tried out Android for a period of time, and it's why I'll keep doing that. I need to do this for my audience because I can't just be completely blinkered in the Apple ecosystem. I need to know what else is out there. And I just think the people who are criticizing the M1 just need to sit in front of one and try it out. Try it, honestly. Just broaden your horizons a bit. Give one a go. It may still not be for you, but I think it's almost impossible not to be impressed by what this chip can do. It might also be that their understanding of this type of computing platform is a little bit outdated. Now, the Apple M1 chip is a self-contained thing. It has everything within it. It has the RAM in it, it has the storage, everything that you need basically pretty much to run a computer resides in that chip. Normally, that isn't the case. You normally have separate RAM, separate SSD, separate everything pretty much, and it all kind of connects together. And one of the biggest parts of this is memory management. And there's a huge debate. I've got involved in it. I'll link to some videos about this 8GB versus 16GB of RAM. And I still get a lot of people on my comments saying 8GB is not enough for a computer in 2021. Well, that isn't true if you are using the M1 platform. I recently did a 4-month review of the M1 MacBook Air, and that version that I have sitting here is the 8GB version, and it's the best laptop I've ever bought. And while I don't use it as my main production workhorse, if my M1 Mac Mini died for whatever reason, I wouldn't think twice about picking that laptop up and using it for 4K video editing. It works brilliantly, and it has 8GB of RAM. Now, obviously, Apple aren't the first to work on a chip of this kind, And actually they've been doing so for years in the iPad and the iPhone. And I also still think we're quite a distance away from having RAM abstracted away completely from specs. So what I mean by that is if you buy an iPad or an iPhone, they never talk about RAM. It's got RAM, but they never talk about it. I think we're a little way off that happening with Macs. I think it will happen at some stage. But I just wonder if the people who are criticising the M1 don't fully understand how different this platform is. And the presence of that 8GB version seems to be completely clouding their view of it. Again, sit in front of one of these machines and use it. I can almost guarantee your opinion will change. The other reason people may not like the M1 chip is because they just can't stand Apple. And again, this is absolutely fine. Apple is definitely a Marmite company. You either love them or you really, really do not like them whatsoever. And if you're in the latter camp, I've got no problem with that at all. And it does mean that those people will poke fun at pretty much anything Apple releases. And sometimes it's totally justified. The AirPods Max case, for example. The iPhone 4 that you have to squeeze to get a decent signal. The Magic Mouse that you have to turn upside down to charge. And that stupid auxiliary cable that you have to buy if you want to plug your AirPods Max into a phone or an amp. So sometimes it is totally justified to poke fun at Apple and suggest they are overcharging for things when other companies do stuff that is much cheaper, much better, much faster. But I don't think it's quite as fair to be that critical of the M1. It's early days for that chip, although it's based on architecture that has been developed for years for the iPhone and the iPad. It's still a new chip for Macs. And I think Apple should be praised for completely changing the game and hopefully, fingers crossed, driving more innovation from other manufacturers. Lastly, these people might be right. What if Apple have jumped onto the M1 bandwagon way too soon? What if it's too early for them to release their own silicon for their Macs? Maybe these people have a point. I mean, after all, there are certain things. So, for example, if you work in music production, you may be aware that lots of third-party plugins still don't work with the M1 platform. And it's apparently true for development. There's lots of development tools that aren't M1 ready. And Adobe, one of the biggest developers on the Mac platform, haven't converted all of their apps to be M1 native yet. Maybe Apple have just jumped on this too soon. Maybe the SSD-ware thing is a thing. Maybe it is going to be a big issue for people further down the line. I don't personally think it is. I've written a lot about this. I'll put a link to an article that I've written about it in the video description, but perhaps these people are right. So which one is it? I'd love to know your thoughts on this. I'd love it when people get involved in the comments, and you'll see in previous videos I do try and respond to as many as possible. So if you're in the camp who absolutely loves the M1, tell us why it matters so much to you and why you think Apple are completely on the right path. Likewise, if you think the M1 is laughable or just not as good as people are suggesting it is, tell us why. Have I got it wrong? You know, are my takes on SSD ware, the 8GB of RAM, the fact that Apple is changing the fundamental makeup of computers, am I getting this wrong as well? Again, please get involved in the comments and give us your opinion. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you want to listen to me ramble on about the use of the word pro in Apple's product line, keep watching for a link to that video. I think you might find that quite interesting. But in the meantime, as always, thank you for watching and I will catch you on the next video.